Okay, hello, buddy. Today is Monday, October 17th, 2022, and some weird stuff happened, I guess, in Unicorn Country and the capital. I guess people are leaving or whatever, or going to be leaving. They already told the Red Dragon people are starting to leave, and then 46 told the Red Dragon people that work over in the Red Dragon country to quit their jobs or they'd lose their United States citizenship, possibly. But I say if they're natural born Americans, then he can't take their citizenship away. So he's strong arming people, or the Chinese people, to quit their jobs over in China, or he'll take away their American citizenship. So it's pretty weird. That's what we got so far, and it's who knows what's going to happen. It's just kind of an unfolding thing. It's like layers and layers are starting to be peeled back, and we're starting to see what's on the inside of the onion now. And it's stinky, and it's just not getting any fresher. So, and they got this new general for the bear country that doesn't seem like he's a very tolerant person, especially with all the stuff that's been going on lately, what I'm talking about, with the being really cruel to the bear people. So, and the bridge and all that, it's getting pretty weird. So, hopefully nothing bad happens, because we don't want anything to happen, because then if nobody wins in that situation, everybody loses, and it creates more hatred and more division, which we don't want. So it's in the Bible that be wars or rumors of wars. So, and also there was Kim Clement who said the bear country and the bear people will be like children before God. So that's probably not a bad thing, because that means that God is you're in God's favor. So I find that to be a good thing. If somebody said that I would be like a child before God, that means that I have half a chance of getting into heaven. So, and nobody's guaranteed that, because the eye of a needle, there was something like that to go through a camel. You have to go through the eye of a needle to get to heaven. Something like that. I'm not going to directly quote, but that's how it is. So we're living on the brink of that, and then possibly, hopefully not, a draft. So I know they're doing it in the unicorn country, and it's not exactly a drafting. It's called conscripting, is the word they use for it in their country. So hopefully they don't start doing that here, because that's just not okay. But we have to wait and see what happens. Hopefully 46 comes up with a possible peace solution to stop any escalation, because now the Middle East is getting involved. I'm not going to say the name, but they're getting involved now, providing tools, I guess, to do this. And then Mexico is now, or was and is, siding with the bears in the bear country. So, and apparently France is also saying they don't want any problems. So they're probably trying to maintain a low profile on the whole thing. So who knows in the end? I mean, all these surrounding countries might end up backing out at the last minute, because nobody wants this. So hopefully that's what the end result is, that they all back out, and there has to be a peaceful solution, because the bears want to exist as well, just like we do. So there has to be a peaceful resolution where everybody can coexist. And you may not like the bears' culture, but it's their culture, and that's the way they like things, just like China or the Red Dragon has their country and their ways, and we're not going to change them. That's why I live in America, because this is all I know. So, but there has to be a peaceful solution of where everybody's happy, not completely happy, but we stay at peace because we need to trade. People need gas, they need wheat, all that stuff, food, and you can't just deprive people of food and resources because these leaders can't seem to get along. Because there's a lot of people that are going to suffer because of it. And in Germany, they said they have been already dismantling old furniture and turning it into firewood because they know that they don't have enough firewood to get them through the winter. And then there's also they're told that they can't fill their gas tanks or their propanes or tank all the way. They can only keep it at 50% capacity because there's a shortage of gas. Of course, there's because the line's been damaged. So that's why we saw that bubbling in the ocean like a week ago because it's been damaged and it's leaking gas all over. And then of course that bridge and everything's just kind of weird. But I just thought I'd mention that at the beginning of this, and I just think it's really crazy that we're doing this. It's really stupid. There's no reason for us to be at odds with each other. With all the craziness going on, we should be uniting and trying to find ways to get people closer to our Maker, which is Jesus Christ. And not force it on people, but just let people know that there is a God without forcing it on them. But just show them the miracles that God displays every day with things that happen that shouldn't happen. That kind of thing. People that are healed that were really sick and all of a sudden they're healed. It's because of God. It's not because of some coincidence. You know what I mean? It's just crazy. And this is another thing. We learn from our mistakes too, see? That we don't do that again. So, see, we're going to learn from this whole conflict not to do that again because it doesn't work and it just creates more hatred and more division. There has to be an agreement. So whoever's going to run in the 2024 election needs to find a way to find a peaceful resolution to the problem over there with the bears and all that. Because my country doesn't like the bears because they're Christian people and they uphold Christian values and they don't allow they don't want drug use in their country, so they're a lot tougher on people that do that. And they just arrested a woman, I think it was a month ago, for twerking in public in bear country because that's their laws and that's their rules and whatever. And she knew better when she was there that's against the law. So, and there's going to be people that are going to test the waters, of course, there always is. Even in the Red Dragon country, I'm sure there's some people that will try to defy things. In America, it's on steroids. There's people everywhere testing things out. So, anyways, I don't want this whole video to be about this. That negative subjects. Yeah, so see here what I did. So here it is. I'm going to read this again because the other day yesterday I couldn't find it, so I read the other book, which is just as good. It's just a different subject matter, which is World War II, but this is Titanic. It is what it is, right? It says Chapter 13, RMS Titanic, Thursday, April 11th, 1912, 8:50 a.m. Alfie froze. "Is there someone there?" he asked in a high-pitched voice. There was no answer and no more movement. He had a small argument with himself. Was it part of a junior steward's duties for less than £5 to see if anyone was hiding in there? Good sense told him no, but curiosity won the day. He picked his way through the piles of cargo and gingerly approached the motor car. As he peered in through the wide windscreen, the last thing he expected to see was a pair of eyes looking back at him. With surprising speed, a small wiry figure in a rumpled steward's uniform leaped out of the automobile, sending a stack of hosiery cases toppling. He stood, poised, as if trying to decide whether he should fight or flee. Hemmed in by piles of cargo, escape seemed unlikely, and a struggle might bring half the crew down upon them. Alfie stared at him. You're the one I saw in the uniform. You're the one I saw in the uniform room. So I was sleeping on the job, Patty blustered. So what? You don't work here, Alfie explained. You're a stowaway. I saw the rags you threw off. You must be thinking of someone else, friend, Patty insisted through clenched teeth. Perhaps we let the captain make that decision. There's a telephone to the bridge just outside in the fireman's passage. You do what you think you have to, Patty replied grimly. And while he's here, we can also ask him why a lad of 15 is signed on to his crew. Alfie winced. How do you know that? I might have overheard a little father and son chat in that same uniform room, Patty told him with a slight smile. You're a stowaway, Alfie accused again. That I am, Patty admitted. And you're underage, so we'll have each other for company when we're put ashore at Queenstown before the Titanic crosses to America. I think sneaking aboard a steamer bound for New York is more serious and a wee exaggeration in the hiring line, the young steward said, a little less certainly. Looks like we're going to find out then, Patty. Looks like we're going to find out then. Patty sensed his advantage and pressed it. I feel sorry for you. I do. For me, Alfie challenged. Well, if I get the bum's rush, I'm right about where I started, but you've got a job, and you're part. I won't tell anybody about you, Alfie blurted quickly. Now, where would the justice be in that? Patty began to pick his way through the maze of cargo. Perhaps I'll telephone the bridge myself. Please don't, Alfie pleaded, but Patty did not stop. All this weighing on my conscience, something terrible. And it wouldn't hurt to put some food in my belly, even in the brig. There's a square meal to be had. I'll bring you food. The stowaway turned around and favored Alfie with a grin. A sandwich would be lovely, and a glass of that nice, rich milk. Light dawned on Alfie. You blackmailing little gangster. Patty's expression darkened suddenly. A blackmailer I may be, but you'll not call me a gangster. Alfie took a nervous step back, even though he was a head taller than the other boy. Gangsters murdered my friend, seethed Patty, his eyes glazing over. Do you think I'd be aboard this ship if Daniel was still alive? I'm sorry, stammered the young steward. I'll bring you food, but first I have to find Miss Willingham's favorite shawl. Patty stared at him for a moment and then burst out laughing. Well, you can't deprive a rich lady of that, can we? Any search this important demands two pairs of eyes. Any search this important demands two pairs of eyes. He followed Alfie out of the cargo hold, through the fireman's passage, into the baggage compartment. I've been in here before, he commented casually. Everything's locked. Alfie turned on him sharply. There'll be no stealing or our deal is off. Don't get your knickers in a twist, Patty chuckled. Why would I need to steal if someone's bringing me food? I want your word on it. Like you gave yours to the White Star Line, Patty returned. They began to scan luggage tags, which identified each trunk and crate according to the owner's deck level and cabin number. Look at this. Patty held up a leather-bound book thick with inserts. The young steward was angry. Put that back. I didn't take it, Patty defended himself. It was just lying here on the deck. It must have fallen out of one of the trunks. I wonder what it is. It's none of your business. That's what it is. There's no name on it. Patty set the volume on top of a large box and opened it to the first weathered page. It seems to be some kind of scrapbook. A newspaper broadsheet was carefully pasted there. The headline read, Ghastly Murder in the East End. Patty stumbled over the first word, but the second he recognized at once. Murder. It brought Alfie swiftly to his side. What murder? Patty indicated the newspaper. Read it for yourself. Some lady in London was murdered with a knife. There was blood everywhere. It's horrible. This newspaper is old, Alfie pointed out. Look how yellow it is. And the date, September 2nd, 1888, 24 years ago. Mary Ann Nichols. Why does that name sound familiar? It can't, Patty concluded. She was dead before you were born. Alfie leafed through the scrapbook. There were newspaper stories of dreadful killings on every page, along with maps of London and line drawings of gruesome crime scenes. These are the Whitechapel murders. What chapel? Whitechapel. It's part of London, Alfie explained breathlessly. The whole of England lived in fear for months. People were afraid to leave their flats and houses. When I was a wee lad, my ma used to say, Alfie, I won't sleep sound in my bed at night until that monster is off the street for good. Even now, after 24 years, they've never found the killer. Ma's still obsessed with the subject. So, is one of the passengers, Patty said. Is one of the passengers, Patty said. What sort of person makes a pastime of recording the foul deeds of a terrible criminal? This is no pastime, Alfie countered, his face paling as he scanned the pages. Look at this. He pointed to a note scribbled by hand in the margin, beside an account of one of the murders. Hanbury Street. Extinguished gas lights. 3 and 4. No mere scrapkeeper could know the details like this. A small cloth envelope was fastened to the cardboard beneath the broadsheet. With a none too steady hand, Alfie unfastened it and tapped the contents into his palm. Out tumbled a large, garish jade earring and 2 tiny objects, lumpy and ivory-colored. His eyes widened in revulsion. Teeth, Patty hissed. Human teeth. Alfie jerked his hand away as if it had been burned. The 3 items dropped to the deck of the hold. The earring lay there, but the teeth bounced and skittered, disappearing among the piled trunks and baggage. Trophies, Alfie rasped in horror. Souvenirs of the people he's butchered. Are you saying there's a murder aboard the Titanic? Patty asked in amazement. Who could it be? The Whitechapel murderer? Murderer was never identified, Alfie replied, his voice filled with dread. But his nickname is well known across England. He let out a tremulous breath. Jack the Ripper. Chapter 14. Port of Call, Queenstown, Thursday, April 11th, 1912. Ireland. Now that he had Alfie sneaking in food, Patty resolved to pass the voyage in hiding, but he couldn't resist the chance to come up to the second-class promenade and take in the sight of the land of his birth. How beautiful it looks! In truth, it was not very beautiful. A misting rain and low overcast sky washed its green into a wet, dirty gray. And anyway, Queenstown was hundreds of miles away from Patty's village in County Antrim. To an Ulster boy, Cork, the southernmost county, might as well have been in England or even America. So how did he explain the empty space where his heart was supposed to be? Why were his eyes filled with a moisture that had nothing to do with the rain? Why did this alien place feel like home? Like Cherbourg, Queenstown's harbor was too shallow for a large ocean liner. Patty squinted at the mass of passengers packed aboard the tender that chugged slowly toward the anchored Titanic. Even from this distance, he could make out the worn cloth coats and caps, the carpet bags and drab beiges and browns. Alfie had told him that no first-class passengers would be boarding at Queenstown, and only a handful of second class. The rest of the group, more than 100 strong, was steerage. Maybe that was why Queenstown seemed so familiar. These were poor people, like me. He felt an almost He felt an almost irresistible urge to get off this floating palace. The impulse made no sense. Ireland meant poverty and hunger, having to steal to survive. How could he choose that over a dream ship filled with millionaires and equipped with luxuries he'd never known existed? Maybe that was the problem. The Titanic was too big, too rich, too perfect. There was something wrong with that. It wasn't real. He'd been wrestling with the uneasy feeling ever since Southampton, when the enormous ship had sucked the New York into a near collision. Now, seeing Ireland within reach again, the solution seemed simple. If he could stow away aboard the mighty Titanic, he could surely sneak into the little tender that was bringing out the last contingent of passengers. He was Irish. Ireland was where he belonged. When the small ferry unloaded its human cargo and went back to Queenstown, Paddy Burns intended to be on it. His feet began to move almost of their own accord. He was being carried toward home by a force he could no longer resist. Before he knew it, he was stepping onto the elevator to E deck, where the new passengers would be coming aboard. "I don't think I've seen you before," the lift operator commented pleasantly. "And you'll not be seeing me again," Paddy replied. It no longer mattered if he was identified as an imposter. What could they do? Put him off the ship? He was putting himself off. "Good luck to you, then. A word of advice. If you're really leaving us, you best change out of the uniform or they'll hound you to the ends of the earth." Paddy laughed. "They can try." If Alfie Huggins was an example of White Star material, Paddy had nothing to worry about it. The young steward seemed a nice fellow, but it hadn't been very hard to blackmail him into protecting a stowaway. A few months in the neighborhoods of Belfast proved more education than all the schools in England. Poor Alfie would have lasted 10 seconds on Victoria Street. He was too absorbed in a series of crimes from 24 years ago to worry about what might be coming around the corner to clobber him right now. Jack the Ripper aboard the Titanic. What next? Paddy navigated the E-deck passageway and reached the gangway just as the tender was tying up. He already had all his worldly possessions, the suit on his back and Daniel's drawing. Too bad he couldn't have managed a few fat purses from first class. That would have kept him in meat pies for a long time, but he couldn't risk missing the tender. His plan was simple. He would pose as a White Star employee escorting the Queenstown passengers ashore, and he would simply never come back. He melted into the group as the gate was lowered and the stewards began welcoming the new arrivals. He saw the bodyguard first, a very tall, rough-looking man with impossibly broad shoulders and a broken nose that wandered all over his face. Next, the houndstooth cloak appeared, and above that, cold, cruel eyes deep set in a stone countenance. The blood drained from Paddy's body and settled in his trembling feet. Kevin Gillihooley, the man who had killed Daniel, the man who wanted Paddy dead. The irony was shattering. To escape this monster, Paddy had sailed from Belfast to Southampton to Cherbourg to here. Yet all this time, Kevin Gillihooley had been traveling by rail across Ireland to embark on that very same ship as him. The man's eyes locked on him and widened in surprise and recognition. In that instant, the Titanic disappeared, and Paddy was back on the streets of Belfast, where the only thing that mattered was staying alive. He fled through passageways, anterooms, and saloons. He dashed up and down companion stairs, past adorned iron hatches and opulent entrances. Behind him, he felt the pursuit in the form of heavy, pounding footfalls, but he also heard it, shouted instructions between Gillihy and his henchmen. "He went that way. Don't let him get away." How can the Titanic's reception party allow two thugs to run rampant all over the ship, threatening a crew member, even an imposter? He wondered as he ran. The answer was obvious. Stewards were trained to cater to the whims of millionaires and the fears of hopeful immigrants. That sort of treatment did not work well with a gangster like Gillihy. His ilk did as they pleased. And if someone stopped them, it was usually someone even bigger, stronger, and meaner. Patty hustled through the third-class dining saloon. Rows of long tables, the decor pleasant but spare and severe. The passageway continued for a distance, ending at a half gate, used aboard ship to divide classes of service. Patty leapt over it without stopping. As soon as his feet touched down, he was aware of the plush carpeting, the paneled walls and subtle lighting that told the rest of the story. This part of the deck saw first-class traffic. The swimming pool, Patty remembered. It's around here somewhere. He slipped through an elegant door marked Turkish bath and was amazed to find himself in a gorgeous room that looked like an Arabian palace. Lounge chairs lined the dark walls, and a few men reclined, wrapped in huge thirsty towels. Two of them even had towels over their faces. It was a scene of a total pampering and relaxation, the kind only a true swell could afford. The attendant acknowledged Patty with a nod and then stepped into the adjoining steam room. Gruff, angry voices sounded in the passageway outside. His pursuers were almost upon him. Gruff, angry voices sounded in the passageway outside. His pursuers were almost upon him. I think I read that. Patty did the first desperate thing that came to his mind. He jumped onto the nearest unoccupied lounge chair, buried himself from head to toe in warm Turkish towels, and prayed that the attendant hadn't counted his customers when he had gone next door. A moment later, the hatch burst open, and Gillahee and his man stormed into the bath. "He's not in here," the bodyguard growled. "This is some kind of posh bathhouse." The devil, he's not," Gillahee roared. He grabbed at the nearest wrapped figure and yanked the towel clean off. "How dare you, sir?" came an outraged authoritative voice. At that moment, the attendant came back into the room and took in the scene. "Please, sir, don't you know who this is? It's Colonel Astor. He's not to be disturbed, nor is anyone in my care." "There's a thief on board," the bodyguard growled. "We followed him to this part of the ship." "You are mistaken, I'm sure," the attendant said stiffly. "This part of the ship is for gentlemen. The word clearly excluded them. If you do not leave at once, I shall have to call the master-at-arms." The henchman pulled himself up to a full 6 feet and 4 inches. You do what you must. I can break 2 necks if necessary." Gillahee held him back. "Easy, Seamus. This is a ship. The little rat has nowhere to run. We'll find him soon enough. And when we do, he's going over the side." Patty lay beneath the towels, barely daring to breathe. As Gillahee and his man left, Patty heard the voice of John Jacob Astor once again. "Well done, Joseph." The wealthiest of the wealthy praised the attendant. "I shall mention your handling of the situation when I dine with the captain this evening." Amen, thought Patty. But now he faced another problem. The Turkish bath that had saved him was now his prison. He couldn't very well leave without being noticed. Yet it was more important than ever for him to get off the ship at this last port. Once they headed into the open ocean, there would be no escape. He would be trapped on board with 2 Gillahee gangsters, and then surely he would never see New York. He needn't have worried. After a few minutes, a voice in his ear whispered, "Come with me." Not a sound. Patty got up from under the towels. Colonel Astor and the other gentlemen were either covered up or dozing. He followed Joseph through the steam room and onto the deck of the swimming bath. "I'm not going to ask what you took from those brutes," the attendant told him in a low voice. 12 pounds, Patty thought dismally. Would that, he'd never reached his hand inside that cloak. Aloud, he said, "A long, sad story it is." Joseph did not press him further. "Stay clear of those 2, he advised before returning to his very important customers. "They look more than capable of turning their threats into reality." Patty made no reply. All his attention was focused on the porthole closest to him. It showed the departed tender halfway back to the Queenstown harbor. He was too late. Chapter 15. Port of Call, Queenstown, Thursday, April 11th, 1912, 1:30 p.m. Captain E.J. Smith, Commodore of the White Star Line, The finest and most experienced master of any ship on the seas stood ramrod straight on the bridge of the Titanic. His eyes were not on Queenstown, but on the open Atlantic. That was the style that had made him a legend. Focused exclusively on the path ahead. It made no difference where one had been, only where one was going. The ocean was reassuringly calm, as if in tribute to the final crossing. Captain Smith was retiring after taking the Titanic on her maiden voyage. It was fitting that his last command would be a memorable one. "All right, Mr. Lightower," he addressed his second officer. "Weigh anchor." Suddenly, a very young seaman rushed into the bridge, all agitation. "Sorry, sir. I tried to stop them." Kevin Gillahee and his huge henchman, Seamus, elbowed their way into the captain's presence. "Captain, you have a criminal among your crew," Gillahee accused. "What I have," Smith said sternly, "are two passengers who have not been invited onto the bridge. I told them, sir, they wouldn't listen." "At ease, Mr. Loomis," said the captain, always under perfect control. Kevin Gillahee was not accustomed to having his request ignored. "Did you not hear me, Captain? I said one of your crew is a thief. I saw the boy not half an hour ago. I demand that you assemble the contingent and allow me to identify him." The captain grimaced. "I do the demanding on this vessel, sir." Standing behind Mr. Lightower, Thomas Andrews, designer of the Titanic, spoke up for the first time. "Allow me to make the introductions, Captain. I live in Belfast, so I'm familiar with this man's family. They are involved in a number of activities that are, shall we say, frowned upon by the authorities." Smith nodded his understanding and turned back to Gillahee. You may feel free to pursue legal remedies with the police in New York, but aboard this ship, I am the law. If that is unacceptable to you, my officers can arrange to have you put ashore here in Queenstown. I trust that's clear." Gillahee was livid. "You're protecting a criminal. The White Star Line will hear about this." A shorter man with a prominent handlebar mustache stepped forward. "The White Star Line has already heard. I am J. Bruce Ismay, the managing director. How do you do?" Gillahee grew redder. "You stuffed shirts always line up against the common man." "Indeed we do," agreed the captain cordially. "Now kindly vacate my bridge. I'm sure you have some unpacking to do. Mr. Loomis will see you to your cabins." When Gillahee and his men were gone, Second Officer Lightower spoke up. Standing by to weigh anchor, sir." "I gave that order, Mr. Lightower." "Captain, the quartermaster informs me that we have only enough binoculars for the bridge crew, not for the lookouts in the crow's nest. Shall I send ashore for additional glasses?" Before the captain could reply, Mr. Ismay offered his opinion. "Of course, I'm merely a passenger, but we're already behind schedule because of that unfortunate incident with the New York. Do you really want to suffer an additional delay?" "Quite right," decided the captain. "A true seaman sees better with the naked eye. Take us out, Mr. Lightower." Minutes later, the great ship began to move toward open ocean. Captain Smith savored the thrum of the Titanic's huge reciprocating engines rising from the deck beneath his feet. One last voyage. Chapter 16, RMS Titanic. Thursday, April 11th, 1912. The view from the boat deck was like nothing Sophie had ever seen. Here, 8 stories above the Atlantic, she was surrounded by endless sea and cloudless blue sky. It was so clear that she could actually make out the curve of the earth at the horizon. She lay back in her deck chair while Alfie tucked a warm woolen blanket around her. "It's cold out here, miss. I brought you a mug of hot bouillon. We can't have you taking a chill." What is it about bouillon on this boat?" Sophie complained. The wealthiest people on earth wouldn't feed it to their dogs anywhere else. But here they swill it like it was the finest champagne." Alfie was taken aback. I can get you tea or chocolate if you prefer. She laughed mirthlessly. Pay no attention to me. I'm having a terrible voyage. But why, miss? Alfie inquired. You're aboard the finest ship in the world. In answer, Sophie gestured over the rail to A deck below them. The windows in the first class lounge were open, and strident voices could be heard in a strenuous argument. There were several men trumpeting with outrage, but the loudest of all was decidedly female. Women are only irrational because the standards of rationality have been established by men. Amelia Bronson held forth. You've been in charge since the dawn of history, and what do we have to show for it? War, hunger, slavery. We should all choose our leaders, not merely half of us. Then you'd see a revolution without bullets or bloodshed. Madam, came indignant bluster, I never thought I'd say this to a lady, but you are no lady. Agreed, Sophie's mother roared. I am a human being just as you are. I suppose you can hear that. Sophie sighed, Sophie sighed miserably. They can probably hear it back in England. I'm told that she's also trying to organize the women on board, Alfie said sympathetically. Perhaps first class isn't the right group for it. Don't tell her that, Sophie explained quickly. She'll go to second class and start recruiting there. And then steerage. We'll put in we'll be put in a lifeboat and set adrift in the middle of the Atlantic. No one thinks of lifeboats on an unsinkable ship, miss, Alfie chuckled. Aboard the Titanic, they either hang you from the yardam or make you walk the plank. Cheer up. Here comes Miss Glam to keep you company. In fact, the girl was practically running, holding on to her long skirt as she hurried up the companion stairs. She rushed over and sat down in the chaise next to Sophie, sinking low. A blanket, Alfie, quickly. A blanket, Alfie, quickly. I can fetch more bouillon if you're cold, the young steward offered, as he tucked a blanket around her. She pulled it right up to her nose. I'm not cold, I'm hiding. Major Mutton Chop is about. He wants to finish his story about tiger hunting in India. Sophie groaned. He is, bar none, the most boring man on the face of the earth. You have no idea how much I was pulling for the tigers. How could you lead him to me, Julie? Juliana laughed. I think I gave him the slip on the grand staircase. Oh, you mean Major Mountjoy, the gentleman from your dining table? Alfie put in. Below decks, they call him Old Windbag. He goes on and on and on. Juliana cast him a look of stern disapproval. I'm certain that the White Star Line forbids you to gossip about your betters. Alfie stared at her as if she had just slapped him. But you just said. Sophie tried to come to his rescue. This is Alfie's first voyage as a steward. He didn't mean any harm. I'm certain he did not, Juliana. I'm certain he did not. Juliana was gracious but unforgiving. She rose from her chair. Perhaps I had best find Papa, and she was gone in a swirl of her skirts. You have to understand, Alfie, Sophie tried to explain. She's not a bad person, but she was raised in a house filled with servants who were no more to her than pieces of furniture. That's the only life she knows. Alfie was chagrined. It's I who should organize. I chased your friend away. I'm most dreadfully sorry. Sophie passed this off with a wave of her hand. I don't want conversation. I don't want to read a book. I just wish something would happen. Alfie blinked. We're on a ship in the midst of an ocean crossing, miss. What could possibly happen? Something that would take my mind off the fact that my mother is picking fights with the most important people alive. She scowled. And what that might be, I have absolutely no idea. Alfie raised an eyebrow. What if I told you there's something on this ship that would turn your mind upside down and inside out? What? Asked Sophie, intrigued. I can't explain. I have to show you tonight. Sophie spent the rest of the afternoon checking the progress of the sun as it sank toward the horizon off the bow. Finally, something to look forward to, besides Mother being strung up by a mob of angry millionaires. Her thoughts crackled with speculation. What could Alfie be on about? What was this mysterious object that would turn her mind upside down and inside out? She hoped with all her heart that it would not turn out to be just another porthole with a slightly different view of the interminable waves. Sailors thought there was nothing more fascinating than the sea. But stewards weren't sailors, were they? Especially a steward on his very first crossing. This had to be something good. At the same time, her anticipation was tempered by a little nervousness. Had she really agreed to meet a boy at 11 o'clock at night for some unknown adventure? What was that wise or even sensible? Why, 20 years ago, a young lady caught alone with a man would be expected to marry him. Then again, 20 years ago, someone like Mother could be hanged for sedition. At minimum, when the constable threw her in prison, they wouldn't let her out again a few days later to catch a first-class boat. Sophie relaxed a little. That was Giuliani's world, the world of a previous century. This was 1912. Mankind had advanced to a point where light and heat came from wires carrying electricity, and Mr. Thomas Andrews could design an ocean liner that was unsinkable. Things were changing, even if it wasn't quickly enough for Mother. She stayed on the deck. She stayed on the boat deck as long as she could bear it, and then started to her cabin early to dress for dinner. As she walked along the passageway on B deck, a soft, juicy snort reached her ears. She rounded the corner and nearly tripped over him. A slender, well-dressed gentleman, sitting crumpled against the paneled bulkhead, smelling of stale tobacco and brandy. Even fast asleep and snoring, there was an elegance to the man in the way his tall frame folded neatly into the corner between the brass rail and the carpeted deck. If Mother were here, the speech would be loud and long. They entrust this drunkard with the vote, while millions of informed, intelligent women. Recognition came as almost a blow. This was no ordinary drunkard. This was the Earl of Glamford, Giuliani's father. Sophie had been about to send for a steward, but could she do that now? If there was one thing the first-class passengers liked more than money, it was gossip. The story of the English nobleman who had to be scraped off the deck and poured into his cabin would make its way back and forth the Atlantic for years. Giuliani would die of humiliation. Her mind made up, Sophie reached down and shook the sleeping man by his shoulders. "Your lordship," she whispered. "It's Sophie Bronson, Julia's friend." The Earl gave no answer, but a large bloodshot eye opened and looked at her in confusion. "You're on B deck." She tried to answer his unspoken question. "Not just that part of the ship, on the deck itself, the floor. Do get up, and I'll help you to your suite." When he made no move to stand, she hauled him to his feet, inserted her shoulder under his arm, and half carried him down the passageway to stateroom B56. It was a struggle. He was an athletic man and no lightweight. Mother would have been impressed. A woman carrying a man. Weaker sex? Fie. At last, wilting under the burden, she managed to scratch at the door. Giuliani's maid, Elsie, took in the sight of her employer and gave a little shriek. Giuliani appeared behind her. "Sophie?" Her eyes fell on the spectacle of her father. The three young women managed to walk him to his bed. When they stepped back from him, he dropped like a stone and lay unmoving. The snoring resumed. "It's the cards," Giuliani explained sadly. "He drinks when he plays, especially when he's losing." "I didn't know what to do," Sophie confessed, catching her breath. "I didn't think you'd want me to call the stewards." Giuliani nodded gratefully. "You're a real friend. I am in your debt. Any time I can do you a service, you have but to say the words." Suddenly, Sophie knew exactly what she was going to ask for. Chapter 17, RMS Titanic, Thursday, April 11th, 1912, 11:10 p.m. It was dark on the spiral staircase that led down the number 2 hatch. The space was so cavernous that Alfie's kerosene lantern cast only a dim glow around the 3 figures. Giuliani could barely see the hem of the gown she'd worn to dinner. It was hours later now, and the ship had grown quiet. The music and dancing had ended some time earlier, and the passengers had retired to their staterooms, or their cigars or their card games. Cards. For once, Giuliani wasn't worried about her father's poker losses. Papa had declined food and was stretched out on his bed. He had been asleep since before the bugler had summoned first class to dinner. He was going to have a paralyzing headache when he woke up. With any luck, that would be long after his late night escapade was over and his daughter was back in their suite again. Have I gone mad? She wondered. What was she doing skulking around the bowels of the Titanic with an untamed American girl and the steward she had inexplicably decided to befriend? But after promising Sophie a service, how could she refuse? So here she was, in the working part of the ship, where it was not seemly for passengers to visit. Surely not the behavior expected of a glam. Mind you, the head of the family hadn't exactly distinguished himself today. So any disgrace Giuliani might bring down on them could only be second to his performance. Whatever happened, she was in for a penny, in for a pound, or those American dollars everyone was so keen on. Now, if we run into anyone, Alfie said in a low voice, remember what I told you. I'm your steward escorting you to your luggage to get something you need. I don't see why we have to go down to the hold ourselves, Giuliani complained. Why couldn't you have brought this up to us? You'll see, miss, Alfie promised. This isn't the kind of thing that you can flash around. Is it just me, or is it getting warmer? Sophie put in nervously. The boiler rooms are just aft of us, Alfie explained. Don't worry, we won't get too close to them. I've been there to visit my da on the Black Gang. You feel like the air you breathe is on fire in your lungs. Alfie, Sophie's voice was subdued. If we get caught here, Julie and I will be scolded. But what will happen to you? I can't really say, he replied, so readily that it was obvious the thought had been haunting him. I suppose it would depend on who catches us, but this discovery I've made has been bubbling up inside of me. I'll burst if I don't share it. Giuliani knew all too well what would happen to Alfie if they were caught. He would be relieved of duty and placed under arrest for the remainder of the voyage. He might even be stranded in New York. Employees dismissed for cause could expect no better. His father's pay might purchase him third-class passage back to England on a different ship, but he would never set foot aboard the Titanic again. What could he possibly have to show them that was worth such a fate? They descended the metal staircase more than 70 feet into the depths of the ship, well below the waterline. It was a disconcerting thought to both girls that the surface of the ocean was actually above them. Yet, apart from the heat, the air felt no different than it had higher up many dozens of steps ago. At last they left the staircase, and Alfie escorted the girls into the baggage hold. Sophie surveyed the endless stacks of trunks and crates and whistled in amazement. Who brought all this? The hat boxes alone would fill the Grand Canyon. We can hardly be expected to travel without the necessities of life, said Giuliani stiffly. Sophie laughed. How many hats did you bring? Spring weather in New York can be unpredictable. How many? 11, Giuliani said defiantly, and then giggled. And this is the only first and second class, Alfie put in, leading him through the maze of baggage. He stopped at a tower of crates secured by netting and reached in through the slats. One marked Gallery Gavroche, Montmartre, Montmartre, Paris. They waited as he drew out the scrapbook and placed it on the flat side of a trunk before them. Giuliani was appalled. You dare to trifle through people's belongings? No, I found this. It must have fallen out of somebody's luggage. Please, take a look. The girls began a slow perusal of the heavy pages, their faces twisting with revulsion at the description of such grisly crimes. It dawned on Giuliani first. This is about Whitechapel murders, the man they call Jack the Ripper. Alfie nodded eagerly. So you've heard of him? Of course, said Sophie. Even in America, some stories are so awful that they never fade away, especially since the Ripper was never caught. Exactly, Alfie explained. This is his scrapbook. He's aboard the Titanic. Don't be ridiculous, scoffed Giuliani. He's probably long dead. The murder stopped decades ago. Then how do you explain the scrapbook? Alfie challenged. Why would you have to? Sophie reasoned. This book is a record kept by some person who was fascinated by the killings. It could belong to anybody. I don't think so, Alfie said gravely. The details written in the margins. Only someone who was there could know these things. And there are, he hesitated, souvenirs. Giuliani was wary. What sort of souvenirs? Look. He leaped forward to reveal a square of fabric, obviously cut with a knife. This piece of cloth comes from Annie Chapman's dress. I think the brown stain is old blood. It gets worse. There are, he shivered, human teeth, all displayed like it's something to be proud of. Sophie's eyes were wide. It still doesn't prove that we're dealing with Jack the Ripper. I admit it's someone loathsome with a sick mind who admires a rampaging butcher enough to create a scrapbook in his honor. And this person is on board? Giuliani demanded. Not in first class, certainly. Money doesn't stop a man from being horrible, Sophie reminded her gently. Or a woman. Equality in every way. Amelia Bronson's motto. Giuliani looked haunted. Whether it's the real Ripper or not, it's frightening. Whose book could this be? I spend all my spare time down here, trying to learn exactly that, Alfie promised. It must have fallen out of the torn satchel of an open trunk. When I found when I find which one, it'll be tagged with the cabin number, and that'll tell me the name. Then I can alert the captain and have the monster thrown in the brig. The girl stared at him. Think of it, he went on. When we steam into New York with Jack the Ripper behind bars, the ship will be on the front page of every newspaper in the world. His eyes were shining with excitement. People will be talking about the maiden voyage of the Titanic 100 years from now. He was interrupted by a scraping sound. The wheel on the hatch to the fireman's passage began to turn slowly. Somebody's coming, Alfie rasped. I'm going to cut this off. I'll pick this up later. Thank you for watching. Cut that in.
I don't know. We're going to learn.